It's a 22-year-old who goes to the big city to see her relatives and winds up dead. Iran's seen an actual groundswell of protest since the death and detention of Mahsa Amini, outrage that spread from small towns in her native northwest to major metropolises across the country. Particularly striking is the defiance of authorities and the accusation that the state is killing its citizens instead of protecting them. Amini was picked up by the morality police for improperly wearing the headscarf that's mandatory for all women in Iran. It's a regime that's seen off many a social movement. The last one over the cost of living in 2019. Will restricting the internet and reportedly posting snipers on roofs again do the trick? What sets this burgeoning movement apart? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking how Iran's protests will go. Joining us from Tehran is correspondent Reza Sayeh. Thanks for being with us.
Good to be here, Francois.
Hamdan Mostafavi is editor-in-chief of the French news weekly magazine L'Express. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
Also joining us, sociologist Azadeh Kian, director of the Center for Gender and Feminist Studies at the University of Paris 7. How are you?
Fine, Paris Cité.
Paris Cité is how, oh, that's right, they changed the name.
Yes, they changed it.
From London, Mahsa Ali Mardani, senior researcher at the human rights group Article 19. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. You saw there at the outset what's become an iconic clip in just a couple of days, that young woman in the northern city of Sari twirling before she deposits her hijab on a bonfire. Mahsa Amini found the same clip filmed from a different angle. Let's take a look. Mahsa, what is it about that image?
I mean, first of all, Sari is one of my hometowns. My family's there. I spent part of my life growing up in Sari, so it resonates a lot with me. And of course, it's just the way that she defiantly takes off her hijab and dances as if, you know, it's a very symbolic act of freedom. And it's beautiful, I think. I can find it hard not to see how anyone couldn't see it as beautiful.
So in 2009, the protest movements were a lot in the big cities. In 2019, what we saw was working class people who were fed up. What have you seen from what you've gathered, Mahsa? Who's out there in the streets?
I mean, I think the thing that's interesting about what's happening right now in Iran is the diversity in the demographics we are seeing. We're seeing all kinds of socioeconomic backgrounds just through the sheer fact that this has really shaken the conscience of the entire nation. The fact that someone was killed and, you know, Mahsa Amini or Jina Amini could literally have been any Iranian woman. And so we are seeing different strata of Iranian society involved in these protests, from the middle classes, from the lower classes. What we saw in 2019 was definitely a demographic more towards the lower socioeconomic stratas in Iran.
Reza Sayeh, what's the situation been like this Thursday in Tehran?
Well, first off, I should point out that I'm in one single location in downtown Tehran, so it's impossible for me to tell you what's happening throughout the capital and certainly throughout Iran. But this particular location seems to be quiet. I took a drive around my neighborhood within the past couple of hours. Things were seemingly quiet. However, there is an uneasy sense of foreboding. You can feel the tension in the air. A lot of people are anticipating something to happen. You can feel the anxiety. And obviously that has everything to do with the past 6 days. Every day we've seen protests in one form or another. They've turned violent. There is a heavy security presence here. But again, from my perspective here, it's important to point out, especially to our international audience, that due to the circumstances on the ground here in Iran, those circumstances include a lack of proper internet, a lack of access to regions throughout Iran, a lack of a credible and authoritative state media, lack of credible sources. It's incredibly difficult to definitively and accurately report to people what's happening, how widespread these protests are. But we can tell you they're significant enough, they're intense enough, they're widespread enough that they've got the attention of authorities. Authorities are taking serious measures to crack down, Francois.
Yeah, we heard the Revolutionary Guard warn of prosecution for those who spread disinformation. How do Iranians read those words?
Well, listen, I think what's interesting is the government, based on what I'm seeing, is using a two-pronged approach to quell these protests. On one hand, they're trying to show sympathy for the death of Mahsa Amini. You had the Supreme Leader's aide reportedly visit the family. You have Ebrahim Raisi saying they're going to investigate this matter. So on one hand, they're seemingly trying to ease concerns. On the other hand, there is a serious crackdown. You have widespread security forces. You have threatening statements, like you mentioned, from the Guard, the Revolutionary Guard, and you have the crackdown in violence and in clashes. So far, this two-pronged strategy hasn't worked in quelling the anger. People are angry, and they've come out in the past 6 days, and a lot of people are eager to see if it's going to happen again tonight.
A 22-year-old woman who dies in custody. Azadeh Kian, why was this enough to spark something that began, it seems, in small towns and has now spread to the whole country?
Well, I think we should understand this in the context of this anger which already existed due to an important economic crisis. The rate of poverty has gone increasingly up to the point that many Iranians really do have enormous difficulty to meet the ends, to make the ends meet. A lot of young people are unemployed. Many of them are still in the streets. And also because the morality police have been really violating and, exerting their violence against women, not only on Mahsa, unfortunately, but also on many, many other women. And this is what sparked this anger is within this context that Mahsa's death, Mahsa's murder, I should say, by the morality police took a lot of women in the streets. And this is the first time, I should say, that we see women at the forefront of protest movement.
First time in 40 years.
First time in 40 years, women have already participated in different movements in 2009, 2018, 19, and so on and so forth. But this time, they are there to ask their own rights. They are, really demanding women's rights, and they are being really supported by a lot of other people, including many men and elderly women. And as it was said, for the first time again, we're seeing really a movement that includes younger ones and older ones, and from all, socio-professional backgrounds who are protesting against the Talibanization of the political power under Raisi, and what is happening against not only women but Iranians who protest in general. Look at what you're doing also to university students.
The Talibanization of Iranian society, at the heart of it all is what's called the Gasht, pardon my pronunciation, Gasht-e-Ershad, the morality police, as was just mentioned there by Azadeh. Yinka Oyatade has more.
Protesters take to the streets across Iran, their anger all directed at one group, the morality police. The unit stands accused of killing 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. Her crime, not wearing her hijab correctly. Her death has thrown Iran's fight against the so-called bad hijab into the spotlight, but it's a war as old as the 1979 Islamic Revolution. The morality police has since then taken several forms. Its latest expression is the Gashti-Ashad, or guidance patrols, a force established in 2007. Many of its agents are from the Bajib, a hardline parliamentary unit. The group, who have been called the Supreme Leader's Fashion Police, are tasked with stamping out un-Islamic dress. This includes making sure women cover their hair and wear long, loose-fitting clothes to disguise their figures. Agents also target men sporting Western hairstyles and reprimand those who engage in noise pollution and unsafe driving. Under reforms which took place in 2016, morality patrollers are only allowed to report those who are found not obeying the rules to the police, who then decide what further action should be taken. But in Mahsa Amini's case, patrollers arrested her, took her to police custody. She died in hospital 3 days later. Members of Parliament are now criticising the group over Amini's death, with one lawmaker calling for the unit to be removed and shut down altogether. This is not the first time Iran's morality police have come under fire. During the 2009 presidential elections, reformist candidates called in vain for its dissolution.
And in Tehran, there really seems to be a problem with the morality police. Here's a sample of those that the French news agency AFP spoke with.
I'm afraid of seeing the morality police. I think it is a useless thing. They should let people choose, like all the other countries.
The morality police should be removed because their behavior toward us is not right.
People are calling the morality patrol the murder patrol because force has never been effective anywhere in the world, and wearing the hijab should not be law.
So, Hamdan Mustafavi, watching that report and listening to those women, it seems as though their power has grown.
Well, it is always women in Iran, even if they are veiled, are always powerful members of society. And
I mean the morality police.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. Because the morality police, the new president, because he's been president for a year and a half now, Ebrahim Raisi, has stressed the importance of the morality police. And this summer there was also 120 pages of document that was out and given to all institutions of Iran to stress the importance of the morality police and give them more lenience, more power. So it also explains why we are today in this situation, and because there's a massive discrepancy between the problems that the Iranians have today and the importance the government gives to the police, to this morality police. Because today, Iranian people are facing economic crisis. They are facing difficulties about the problem caused by the nuclear program. So there is, so many international problems for Iran, and the government thinks more about the morality police. It's also the difference, the gap between people's everyday trouble and the things the government care about that are striking. And I wanted to insist on the fact that, I don't know, people who don't know Iran might think that for Iran, Mahsa was wearing her veil in a provocative way. But no, all girls in Iran, they all adapt the way they wear the veil. So any girl in Iran could have been arrested, There are not, all Iranian girls are not wearing full chador like maybe people that don't know Iran might imagine that, it's like...
But when you heard Azadeh Khan talk about the Talibanization of Iranian society, is that
Not
fair?
Iranian society, Iranian power.
Iranian power, excuse me.
No, it's not the society. I agree with...
Absolutely not.
Yes.
Sorry.
Sorry to mischaracterize it.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with Azadeh. It's more the government, this government, and that has increased the pressure on people at a time when it's not relevant. And I've had the chance to talk to somebody who was protesting in Sanandaj in Kurdistan, and he told me it was really an anger, a deep anger. It was not, they don't have really the hope of toppling the regime or anything. It's just they have to express this anger, and it's accumulated through the years, and now they need to express it.
All right. In Iran, Reza was telling us earlier how it's difficult to give an accurate description, what with the internet either disrupted or shut down. This Thursday, the monitoring organization NetBlocks calls these the most severe restrictions put on the web since the 2019 cost of living protests. One analyst says the protests have spread at the beginning from the northwest again to the rest of the country. This map compiled by the Institute for the Study of War charts the situation in terms of where the protests are taking place. This as of Wednesday, so some 24 hours ago. And many of these videos that we've seen are coming from cities, not just in the northwest, in the Kurdish part of Iran where Mahsa was from, but also from the north near the Caspian Sea. Here in Amol, this is in the northern province of Mazandaran, we see images of the governor's office going up in flames. Let me ask you about this, Mahsa Amini. Why the north? Why this area near the Caspian Sea? Have we seen so many of these videos come in?
In the break, Azada said, why not the north? And I agree with her. I mean, knowing Mazandaran province personally, I do know that it is a demographic that has historically just been very progressive and liberal. So I am not surprised that a population like this would be taking a stance for human rights, for women's rights. And also another thing I just want to clarify, your reporting discussed that it's a lot of grievances against the morality police, but I think that might be inaccurate of some of the asks that the protesters are actually putting forth, because the morality police might be the perpetrators in the one instance of Mahsa, but the grievances are far wider and go against, the impunity with which the whole system acts. So, you have articles within the Islamic Penal Code that criminalize women not wearing hijab, criminalize women promoting not wearing hijab. So if you get rid of the morality police, there will be other institutions that will take its place and implement the same repression. So I think it's important to clarify that, especially as we see actual officials and members of the Islamic Republic saying, well, yes, the problem is the morality police. So they want to have those very limited concessions and not the overall picture that women's rights and human rights are systematically repressed within the system.
Yeah, because you heard Hamdan Mustafavi talk about empty coffers in Iran, and yet it seems as though the security apparatus has, if anything, more and more layers to it.
Absolutely. There's many different layers of the security apparatus, and I think that's one of the important things when looking at this, especially in the trajectory since November 2019. The security apparatuses have been preparing for a moment like this past week. But what is actually also interesting is that protesters and people have also been preparing for moments like this. And so, as your reporter said, it's very hard to understand the scale and how many people are actually out on the streets. But just from following social media and looking at some of the data, it does seem like we are getting more content and more footage and more documentation. And I think that really harkens to the fact that people are kind of more prepared, have more strategies to figure out how to, bypass and find connections and upload documentation, and really putting in the effort to hold the crimes of the Islamic Republic to account. So there's some really amazing, I think, networks right now doing this documentation work and promoting it and pushing it out onto social media.
Just to explain for Mahsa, do you have to be a tech geek in order to bypass the system on days like today when the internet is restricted?
So, I mean, we haven't been seeing as severe of restrictions as we saw in November 2019 yet. There are still lots of pockets of connectivity, and I'm sure if you ask the women in the studio with you who are in touch with their friends and family, they can tell you as well, there is connectivity. You can find some people on certain networks, on certain home Wi-Fi, using certain VPNs that are working. There's certain locations within universities, for example, within government buildings, media buildings that are connected. And so I guess it's more of having the right networks, knowing, okay, I have taken this footage, how do I get it to the correct spot where it can be uploaded? And I think there's been a lot of preparation and a lot of strategizing for that as well. So, you know, while we can say that security forces have strengthened, we can also say that people and protesters have also been quite savvy and smart.
Yeah, you have to keep in mind that Iranian people are quite young, and they are a very connected generation. They were the first to have blogs, for example, 20 years ago, and they are very. It's like a nation of geeks. And they know they have been living with this system for a long time. So and internet crackdown has been a very important part of what the regime has done. So yes.
But is that just upper middle class people or everyone?
No, many people, really. I think it's quite widespread this capacity to face the fact that Facebook is some down or shut, or you have to go through different VPN to get to Instagram. That's been part of their life for a long time.
Azadeh Khan, in 2019, we saw snipers on roofs killing a lot of people. We had a bloody crackdown when we had those cost of living protests in Iran. You just heard Mahsa Amini saying how both the regime and protesters have been preparing for another moment like this one?
Well, preparing, I don't know, but what we know is that this time, because the regime has imposed or has been imposing violence on protesters, this time people who demonstrate are also reacting to violence, which means that they are, for instance, they have put into fire many morality police cars. They have put into fire some official buildings, for instance. They have been pursuing some of these morality police or Basijis, militias. These are pictures that we have seen, which means that these people are no longer just standing there to suffer from the violence, but they are also exerting violence, reacting to violence, and this is quite. This is something we have not seen before again. So which means what? Which means that this time people are much younger than before. As was argued, they know how to use social media, but at the same time, they are very, very angry. This anger has been accumulated, and because there are no independent political parties, independent worker syndicates, or etc. So when you're angry and when you have demands, the only way you can express yourself is to get to the streets and to demonstrate. What happens next is that they will shoot you. And then what happens next is that you're even more angry than before, of course. And this has been going on for some years for the moment. But this time, it's again, we should not forget that we should not forget the women who are there in the streets, women who are more courageous than before and more demanding in terms of their own rights than before. So it's not just only general demands, but specifically women's rights demands. And for instance, one of the major slogans we've heard is woman, life, liberty, which means that for the first time, as far as I know, protesters, that is those who are for liberty, those who are for democracy, have understood that if women have not gained, or until women have not gained their equal rights, you cannot talk about democracy, you cannot talk about liberty. And so they are kind of linking women's rights with a democratic future for Iran. And this is a huge step forward.
Reza Sayeh, how much clout do women have in today's Iran? Is it growing?
They have huge clout. They've been on the forefront of every major anti-government protest. And by the way, I'm hearing often these past few days the word unprecedented to describe these particular protests. These protests are significant, but there's not as big, nowhere near as big of what I personally saw back in 2009, the Green Movement, which again was in many ways led by the women's movement. Of course, that lasted for months and it dissipated. And I think a lot of people are wondering if these protests will grow into something similar. And based on my observations at this point, there's no indication that it will. But what's interesting to me is, Iran is a complicated place. And I think, when you hear people describe these protests with certainty and unambiguously, it makes me question them. 7 years ago, you had hundreds of thousands of people pouring out the street in 2015 and celebrating and supporting the Iranian government. 7 years ago, the morality police was here, the Basij was here, the Revolutionary Guard was here. Iran was still being described as the leading state sponsor of terrorism. Even so, the people came out. They voted en masse for the moderate president, Hassan Rouhani. They poured out in the streets and celebrated. And the question is, what happened since then? If you're going to describe the Iranian government as Talibanized, what happened? What brought Mr. Raisi, the current president, an ultra-conservative, into power? And many believe that the U.S. had a role with pulling out of the JCPOA. European capitals had a role when not stepping up and delivering the dividends to the JCPOA. And many believe that led to the ouster of a moderate president who picked up the phone and called Washington and President Obama. And now you have Mr. Raisi. I think if you zoom out, there's an interesting discussion. And as always, it is a complicated discussion because Iran is complicated.
Well, let's talk about Mr. Raisi. He was at the United Nations in New York this week, the new president, sticking to the script of old, you might say. Ebrahim Raisi's speech at the United Nations, harking back to the United States' assassination in 2020 of Revolutionary Guards leader Qasem Soleimani in Baghdad, accusations of double standards when it comes to women's rights.
The Islamic Republic of Iran rejects some of the double standards of some governments vis-à-vis human rights. So until we have these double standards where attention is solely focused on one side and not all equally, we will not have true justice and fairness. Human rights belongs to all, but unfortunately this is trampled upon by many governments.
Mustafavi, your reaction to Ebrahim Raisi's visit to New York?
Well,
where he met with the French president, by the way.
Yes, he did, because the French president is trying with all his strength to revive the nuclear deal, which is a bit complicated at the time, because you know that the Iranian government was quite upset when Donald Trump got out of that nuclear deal. So now they are posing many conditions to get back to that deal. And as Reza was pointing out in Tehran, Iran is a complicated country. So as Iranian people are quite proud, they don't want their government to go back to that deal too easily. So that's also something to wait about.
Is this a factor, this protest movement? In terms of whether or not a nuclear deal is signed, does it make it easier or harder? It's not at all a factor.
No, all is linked. It's hard to say that there's no link between things. Of course, when you don't know if Trump didn't pull out of the nuclear agreement, and today there was prosperity and no economic pressure in Iran, maybe there won't be this protest. It's hard to say that there's no link between things, but it's also hard to really connect them.
All right, here's another question. Iran's supreme leader, he spoke in public on Wednesday. It was the second time in under a week. We can show you images from last Saturday as aides were dismissing a New York Times report that 83-year-old Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was ailing and under observation by a team of doctors. But, you know, he is 83 years old, Azadekian, is part of this Talibanization that you mentioned, because everybody wants to seem, as we say in French, more royalist than the king, as people start to think about succession?
Yes, of course, the question of succession has been posed for some years now, and there's also a rivalry inside the ruling power as to who is supposed to succeed the leader when he passes away. And the fact that he was seemingly, he went through a surgery recently. He's not dying, but he might in some coming years. So his son Mojtaba was promoted Ayatollah all of a sudden, presumably in order to be on the list of one of the potential successors of the leader. But he is the one. But the leader is the one who supports this Talibanization. He was at the head of this Taliban-like government now. He is the one who appointed Mr. Raisi. I agree with Reza that the pulling out of Donald Trump from the JCPOA is responsible for what the Iranian society is living today, but at the same time, it does not justify the killing of demonstrators. These are two issues that we should be able to separate. On the other hand, Iranian people are proud. I don't agree with you that Iranian people, yes, they are proud, but they do not say that the Raisi and his establishment should not sign JCPOA.
No, but not at any condition, I mean.
Yes, because up to when can the Iranian society tolerate these American sanctions against oil or Iranian gas and so on and so forth? And on the other hand, this has pushed the Americans, and Trump have pushed Raisi and ultra-conservatives toward Russia and China. And this, to me, has played a crucial role in this Talibanization I'm talking about. Because Europe has absolutely no way of putting pressure on the Iranian government right now, which was not the case back in the years 2000 under the reformist Khatami, or when Rouhani was in power, because they were hoping for a deal, for a JCPOA deal. And we know that Iranian government back then was rather pro-European than pro-Soviet, or pro-Russian, and pro-China. This is not the case today. So we should really look at the global context, not only focusing on what's going on today, but also what has been going on ever since at least 2018. And the role Americans, Donald Trump, played in the situation that Iranians are suffering from today.
Mahsa Amini, from what you have been able to gather, monitoring what goes on inside of Iran, is putting a hardliner at the helm, as the way Reza described it there, as president, about the Iran nuclear deal and the way the West went back on its promise? Or is it about domestic politics and the fact that you have this aging supreme leader?
I mean, it can be really about both. One interesting thing that Reza said was, how do you differentiate between the crowds that came out in support of Rouhani and his elections, and now what we're seeing in terms of protests? And I don't think there's incompatibility in even finding the same people who were excited and maybe at Rouhani's rallies in 2013 and even maybe in 2017, wanting to vote for him and, just having hope that this could be a way forward, a hope with JCPOA. And I do think some of those same people are now very disillusioned. So I don't think there's incompatibility with that. But so much has happened since Rouhani and JCPOA. Rouhani didn't deliver on all the hope that, you know, brought the folks out into the ballot boxes. You know, we saw a massive decrease in the amount of votes and participation in this last election for Raisi. And, you know, even if JCPOA was to come back and there was to be economic relief, I don't think you know, the protesters and a lot of the Iranian people are going to forget the crimes that are being committed in broad daylight. Well, I say broad daylight, there's a lot of internet blackouts happening, but, you know, it's being documented really well. So it is quite a complicated scenario, but it's hard to see where you could go forward after watching what's happening on the streets in terms of, you know, security forces slaughtering their own people.
There's, from what you're saying, there's a social contract between the people and their government which is broken. Was it broken in 2009 or was it broken in 2019 when you had those cost of living protests?
You know, I think in 2009, we had a different demographic of folks protesting, and for different reasons. They weren't necessarily protesting for the downfall or a complete change in the system. They were protesting for their votes. And, you know, it's over a decade has passed since 2009, and the generation has really shifted. And we're seeing the majority of people are not part of, you know, they weren't part of the 1979 revolution, and they are very disconnected with the Islamic Republic of Iran. So, you know, as we're looking at this historical view of these protests and who are actually participating and for why, I think we're seeing completely new realities right now with all of these different complicated factors in play.
Reza Sayeh, who, from what you've gathered, who's been out in the streets?
I think a lot of young people, a lot of young progressive people. And I think what escalated the protests is people who have economic grievances, who are simply fed up, joined in these protests. And that, in many ways, made the protests grow. And I just think people are angry here. They're frustrated. And this was an excuse. The death of Mahsa Amini was an excuse to get out and express their anger. And frankly, I think many of the people who were celebrating in 2015 are out here protesting. And I think perhaps the fact that they were celebrating in 2015 and now they're angry and now they're fed up and they're protesting suggests that maybe the hijab isn't first and foremost on their minds, that maybe if the government delivered them the economic benefits, jobs, a little bit more social freedoms, political freedoms, the people who live here and understand the realities would tolerate the hijab. However, when 7 years went by and all those economic promises weren't delivered, and then you had violence, and then you had an incident like this, I think that led to many people being fed up and pouring out into the streets.
Yeah, just wanted to say that according to the polls taken in several cities in Iran and especially in Tehran, for instance, we know that the majority of the population, including religious people, think that women should be free to choose whether they want to be veiled or not. So the question we're talking about here is to respect each people's freedom to wear or not to wear the hijab. And more importantly, why is it that we're talking about the Islamic veil? Because the Iranian government, the Iranian regime, right from the beginning, made the hijab actually a symbol, their ideological symbol. They say that it protects the blood of the martyrs, and those who do not respect the hijab are those who are enemies, those who are not with us, and so on and so forth. Hijab was sacralized by the Islamic regime, became the symbol of this regime. So those who do not agree today to wear the hijab, or at least not to wear it as good as the government wants are also the ones who are rejecting these symbols. I do not agree that it's just, it has now a very, very important ideological symbol to it. And for this very reason, in the demonstrations today, what we hear is woman, life, freedom, but at the same time, death with dictator, and so on and so forth. That is that, again, the people are kind of linking all these issues together, which is very, very important. And I think this is the first time that this has been happening in the country.
Okay, but here's the problem, and I'll put it to you, Hamdan Mustafavi. You heard Reza talking earlier about a sense of foreboding in Tehran this Thursday. I spoke to one analyst who said that there isn't much daylight because the supreme leader has given no indication that he wants to concede any ground on this issue.
Yes, I'm really looking at this protest, and as a fellow Iranian, of course we feel a lot of common ground, but I'm not very optimistic in the whole because I think we've seen the regime has been through those crises before, so I think they're well prepared. So they might do no concession, and it will pass. So, but what is important is that the hijab taboo has in part fallen, and that it's an Islamic regime, so it's one of the pillars of the regime. So the fact that we see so many women breaking that taboo, even if it doesn't, change overnight. Of course, I don't think it would change overnight. It is something that will remain in the conscience.
Mahsa Amini, sometimes by ruthless means, the regime has outlasted protest movements, and there's been others, by the way, between since 2009, not just the one in 2019. Will they ride this storm out as well, or, as Hamdan says, will it be difficult to put the genie back in the bottle when it comes to women's rights?
I think both can be true. People keep on saying, is this a revolution? I don't necessarily think it is a revolution. A really well-known Iran academic wrote the other day, this is certainly a revolution in the way people protest. So yes, the genie is out of the bottle. The taboo of hijab is broken. A few years ago, we had mass arrests of hijab protesters. We even have a famous lawyer, Nasrin Sotoudeh, who's in jail for just defending those hijab protesters in court. It will be hard for them to prosecute all these women, as we are seeing them in hundreds of videos on social media. So certainly that is an evolution. In terms of what this will mean, the state has monopoly over violence. So I think we all know what this means. We are going to see bloodshed. Lives are going to be lost because we know the system works with impunity when it comes to these kinds of crimes. In terms of will they concede, I'm not necessarily hopeful. It does seem like hijab is the way that they are holding the line of their authority. I was in a discussion, I was listening to a Twitter Spaces with different moderate and reformist politicians and writers in Iran, and someone said, well, if we reform mandatory hijab, what comes next? We have to give freedoms to homosexuals. So this is very much, I think, the thinking of, we are holding the line here, and if we concede on this, everything else will come falling down, including our authority, which is, they have a theological authority over the country.
All right, and it's certainly something that we're going to continue to follow in the days to come. Mahsa Amini, I want to thank you so much for joining us from London. I want to thank as well correspondent Reza Sayeh in the Iranian capital, Hamdan Mustafavi, Azadeh Khan. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.